October 1, 1918. After 4 centuries of Ottoman rule, Arab forces entered Damascus, believing they had finally secured the right to govern themselves. For the nationalists in the streets, the dream of a united empire stretching from Syria to Yemen felt within reach. But while the crowd celebrated, their independence was being negotiated away. In the administrative offices of London and Paris, the map of their future had already been drafted without their knowledge. History remembers this uprising as the Arab Revolt, but the borders it left behind suggest a different story, one defined by administrative deception and the structural instability that followed. The victory in Damascus provided Western powers with the opening they needed to draw the lines of blood that define the modern Middle East. For 400 years, the Arab regions and the Turkish Ottoman Empire functioned as a single political entity. They were bound by a shared religion, a common history, and deeply integrated cultures. The Ottoman Sultan acted as the servant of the 2 holy sanctuaries, a title that made him the protector of Mecca, Medina, and Al-Quds. This wasn't a European-style colonial administration. It was a system built on religious and cultural continuity. The shift began with the arrival of a European ideology, nationalism. It promoted the idea that every distinct language group required its own sovereign state, a concept that had already begun to dismantle the Ottoman Empire's European territories. In the late 19th century, this idea was championed by Arab intellectuals in Beirut and Damascus. Many were educated in Western missionary schools, where they began to define a great Arab history that stood in opposition to their shared Islamic identity with the Turks. The tension peaked in 1908, when the Young Turks seized power and deposed Sultan Abdul Hamid II. This new secular military leadership replaced the empire's inclusive religious framework with a narrow Turkish nationalist agenda, often marginalizing the Arabic language and its speakers. As the British occupied Egypt and the Italians attacked Libya, Arab leaders grew fearful. They saw a nationalist government in Turkey that was no longer willing or able to defend Arab lands from European expansion. By the time World War I began in 1914, the internal trust that held the empire together had dissolved, leaving the region vulnerable to external manipulation. When the Ottomans joined the war against Britain, London faced a strategic crisis. The empire controlled the land and sea routes to India, and its territory bordered the Suez Canal, the most critical artery of the British Raj. There was also the threat of a global jihad. If the Ottoman Caliph successfully mobilized the 100 million Muslims living under British rule, the empire's colonial holdings in India and Africa could collapse in weeks. Britain's solution was to incite a domestic rebellion. They aimed to undermine the Caliph's authority by backing an Arab uprising from within the empire. They found their partner in Hussein bin Ali, the governor of Mecca. Hussein sought to secure his family's legacy by establishing a Hashemite monarchy over a unified Arab state. To manage the revolt, Britain sent Thomas Edward Lawrence. An archaeologist turned soldier, Lawrence embedded himself with Hussein's sons, providing the strategic guidance and the British gold necessary to buy the loyalty of local tribes. Between 1915 and 1916, Britain formally promised Hussein an independent kingdom, stretching from the Turkish border to Yemen. It was a strategic lie, intended to secure Arab military support, while Britain focused on its own imperial defense.
In June 1916, Sharif Hussein declared the revolt. Lawrence immediately began arming the guerrilla forces with British rifles, machine guns, and high explosives. Their primary target was the Hejaz Railway. This project had been funded by donations from Muslims worldwide to link Damascus to the holy city of Medina, serving as a physical link for the Islamic world. By blowing up tracks and destroying trains, the rebels were using British weapons to dismantle the infrastructure that unified the region, effectively severing their own connection to the wider empire. While the rebels advanced, the Ottoman commander in Medina, Fakhri Pasha, refused to surrender. For 2 years, his garrison endured a brutal siege. When supplies ran out, his soldiers were forced to eat grass and locusts to survive. Fakhri Pasha ignored direct orders from his own government to capitulate, keeping the Ottoman flag flying over the Prophet's tomb for 72 days after the war had officially ended. He was only removed when his own men arrested him. The rebellion's success allowed British General Allenby to enter Jerusalem in late 1917. For the first time in 7 centuries, the city was taken from Muslim administration.
By fighting to remove the Turks, the Arab forces removed the only regional power capable of resisting European control, effectively handing their holiest cities to Christian colonial powers. In 1919, Prince Faisal arrived at the Paris Peace Conference. He brought the written promises of British officials, expecting to be recognized as the leader of a sovereign, unified Arab empire. He instead discovered that Britain and France had already divided the region amongst themselves. Lawrence, his supposed ally, had been aware of this secret deal throughout the entire revolt. The Sykes-Picot Agreement ignored the promises made to Hussein. It handed Syria and Lebanon to France, while Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine were placed under British administration. These borders were drawn to protect oil pipelines and trade routes, not to reflect the needs of the people living there. They locked disparate groups and rival tribes into artificial states, creating a structure that relied on external force to remain stable. The Hashemites were given consolation prizes, puppet thrones in Iraq and Jordan, where real power remained in London. Sharif Hussein himself was eventually abandoned by the British and died in exile. The revolt did not result in a unified Arab state. It replaced a 400-year-old regional integration with a series of fragmented dependencies controlled by European mapmakers. Britain had one more secret that would transform the region. This is the Balfour Declaration of 1917. In this letter, the British government pledged to support the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, promising land that was still part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. This commitment, followed by the British occupation of Palestine, directly led to the 1948 conflict and the establishment of Israel, creating a permanent center of tension in the heart of the Arab world. The Arabs traded their role in a multi-ethnic empire for a dozen weak, competing states. The borders drawn in 1916 forced together groups with no shared political history, laying the groundwork for the civil wars and dictatorships that followed. The Hashemites abandoned a centuries-old regional framework for a nationalist promise that the British never intended to fulfill. By dismantling their own regional unity, they left themselves vulnerable to a new form of external rule. It is a decision that has left the Middle East paying a price in blood for over a century.